let's talk about what YouTube has been doing over the past few days. YouTube has set out a new set of guidelines, a new set of rules for what we are allowed to share here on this platform. And this kind of falls in line with the other rounds of censorship that we've seen over the past few days. DuckDuckGo has also announced new changes where it was going to delist information about Russia. We've seen this from Twitter. We've seen this from Facebook. YouTube is doing this now, telling us what we can and cannot share here on this platform. Otherwise, what? They'll hide us. They'll make us undiscoverable, because it doesn't fit this big tech oligarchy narrative, right?
So right now they're saying that they will be policing any video that, denies, minimizes, or trivializes well-documented violent events, and they will remove content about Russia's invasion of Ukraine that violates this policy. So I want to make it clear, we do all understand that there is an aggression on the part of Russia into Ukraine where they were uninvited, and people are being hurt. There are well-documented, hurt and killed. There are well-documented deaths at this point.
Thousands.
In the thousands, right? So that seems benign enough on its face, right? You cannot be a Holocaust denier, basically, right?
Right.
So... But that leaves very little room for any kind of context. And I think that's where we've been aiming in the last couple of weeks, not at all to deny that Russia was uninvited and made a military advance that was not wanted on behalf of part of the Ukraine people.
Yes. And of course, thousands of people have been killed, many, like 2,000 people overnight in attacks from the Russian government into Ukraine. But what is YouTube saying here? That we can't talk about more broadly the context with which this unfolded?
Well, that's why we wanted to discuss this with you, because it is what it seems like. In the past couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about a free marketplace of ideas, which may be utopian, but we will never know because we increasingly do not have it, right? And so when we just say Russia's the bad guy, they're just coming in where they're uninvited, no one there wants them, that's wrong. It's historically wrong, and it's contextually wrong, and it takes away the power of people who would like to discuss this with cooler heads to contextualize when now we have to follow this narrative that it's just good and bad, right? So as we talk about later, how Ukraine wants this war to sort of catapult them into the European Union and why that may or may not be unfair, we're going to have to talk about how Ukraine is not just a good guy, and that is dangerous on this platform.
But we should also be able to criticize YouTube. I mean, if this is remember this channel, YouTube started as it's you television, right? It's you, right? It's you. You get to share. You get to put up cat videos. You get to share commentary on the world, right? But at the end of the day, it is run by Google, which is a massive tech oligarchy, and they get to censor. In the same way that Facebook is censoring, Russia is calling for the shutdown of Facebook and Instagram after their rule change last week, where they're basically like, yeah, you can allow for the calls of violence against Russian people. I mean, you have Senator Lindsey Graham continuing this morning to call for the assassination of Vladimir Putin. He doubled down on that again over the weekend. And so what are you allowed to say under the auspices of these tech oligarchs from Silicon Valley? Make no mistake about it. They run the show.
Right.
They run Washington.
It's less about what we are going to say, although I think the flavor of our show has been that we are scared to label anyone good or bad, at fault and no fault, because you run the risk of making these mistakes again if you don't understand these things. And also, it takes maturity to not follow in line with the media and, companies and powers that be, or any hegemony wants you to think and say, well, I don't know if I actually believe all of that. Have I been someone who otherwise always championed Ukraine, or is this the flavor of the moment? And do I want to stop and think? And I think that's it's less about what we want to say. It's more about what we all get to hear.
Well, right. And there's a video that I was notified of on YouTube over the weekend by 60 Minutes Australia. And here's the title: Russian oligarch puts $1 million bounty on Vladimir Putin's head. And that is still on. that is still up. But if you were to
It's still
say,
allowed.
yeah, if you were to say that, somebody puts a bounty on Zelensky's head, that would be gone.
Be removed. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. And of course, that would also be downranked on DuckDuckGo and all of these sites. So make no mistake about it.
Wasn't there a counter where I don't know if I guess what I had read was being snarky or not, but that Putin had put $1 million bounty on that oligarch's head. You probably don't read about that.
I don't know the ins and outs of this particular story.
They
exactly.
blocked Russia
there
television.
are many bounties, and also Russia has bounties on Ukrainian leaders as well. Because I mean, really, the
Well, what about the fake story about U.S. soldier bounties? I mean, can we talk about that? Or that story about like there were bounties on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. Remember that story that was supposedly because of Putin? Like that was pushed out everywhere. Never mind the fact that, how disinformation, misinformation, we can just foist that as much disinformation and misinformation as possible. But when you're on the other side of the argument, they're gonna ban you, they're gonna censor you, they're gonna take you off YouTube because it doesn't fall in line with their
But also,
rules.
why this war and not any other? There's still a pretty serious conflict going in Ethiopia. We can say whatever we want about that.
Maybe because it's what the guy said. Remember that one journalist from CNN, if you want to call him a journalist, who said the quiet part out loud, which is these are white people in Europe, and that's why people are focused on it.
I don't
Did
think
you
that's
see that?
necessarily the case, though. I do think it has to do with power. Like, are we really afraid of who disrupts the government in Ethiopia? Is that going to disrupt NATO or the United States hegemony? No, right? But if Russia grows in power, and as we're going to talk about later, gets China as its bosom buddy, that does threaten us. So we need all eyes on that war. But big tech has an equal responsibility to level the playing field for any conflict. Syria, North Korea, the Arab Spring, right? There are my kids this morning, we were watching the news and we saw these images, awful images coming out of Ukraine. And they're like, is this happening now? I said, yes, but not just there. It is also happening in other places in Syria, in Ethiopia. I don't want them to have this like, oh, this is where the media is turning my head at this point, right? And that's what we're upset about at this point.
Well, no, because if you point a light on, or put a light on that stuff, then you start to realize that the U.S. are the bad guys and probably worse than Russia, and we can't have that.
YouTube, this is again why we have a daily newsletter, and not to push this, it's free, but again, we were shut. I mean, for those of you who don't know, like our channel was shut down for a week. YouTube sent out a notification. I was at the movies with my son, and I come out and find out that, oh, our channel is shut down. Why? Well, because we were talking about vaccines. We were talking about how vaccines don't stop the spread of COVID, right?
Yes, but it was at a time when you weren't supposed to say that.
Wasn't supposed to say it, wasn't allowed to say it. Then it turns out to be true. But we were going off of data showing that was the case. Didn't matter. YouTube still shut us down. And we couldn't send a message out on our platform. We couldn't use our community page. We couldn't post a video. We couldn't do anything. The only way we were able to explain what was going on is because we had our newsletter, and we sent a newsletter email out to all of you to say, hey, this is what happened. And we heard from so many of you that said that's awful. And so we had to wait a week. So again, we have a newsletter. morninginvest.com is the newsletter. Go sign up. It's totally free. You get a newsletter every morning, but also we're able to send you an email in case something like that happens. And they make no mistake about it. They're shutting down channels left and right.
So I think for all of us, it's not just about whether or not you trust us or trust our analysis or anything like that. It's about what you are being allowed to see and what you are not being allowed to see. And I think anytime you feel like the narrative on your computer screen is pushing you into some emotional reaction, you have to check yourself. And I felt the same way when I started seeing Ukrainian flags pop up, because I was like, wait a minute, same Ukraine that is being denied entrance in the European Union because of all of this corruption. And now I understand, right? We are, no country should be invaded. We believe that. But are we really fighting for existing patriarchy because the news media is pushing? I think I've said many times, I root for no patriarchy. I'd like to see all governments have a tower moment that use their power for wrong, which is most government. But at the same time, I just think that it's important for us to say, to not applaud any of these big tech, like theater, right? This like virtue theater that where they're saying we block this content, right?
Yeah, we choose this.
But
Yeah,
what
that's
do we do? What do we do now? Like, for us that do the show, and I like to do research. I like to go down those rabbit holes and look at things. But like now, some of my news sources that I would get actual news from, because you can't get it from U.S. media. What do we do? What do we do when all of those places the websites are no longer loading? They're all taken down off of YouTube. Like, where do we find good information? It's like the only thing you're going to get is the propaganda.
Yeah, and this
right,
is where
but
I think you have to have like
analog, like
this is
your
where-
library card still works, guys.
But this is where also having like a VPN works as well, making sure you're set up with a VPN. And so maybe you could log into Iceland. Iceland is a country that is arguably probably the most protected from when it comes to internet traffic. But, set up your VPN, log in via Iceland. Yes, go to Reykjavik, okay, and read news sources there and actually get access to the stuff that you're being blocked. Can you imagine we're having this conversation that you're literally being blocked in the United States from accessing news information? Did you ever think we'd hear about this?
But if it's getting blocked all over Europe too, which a lot of it is, then the VPN isn't going to do anything. And then if you go to the library, you're not getting updated real-time information like you can online,
I know. I mean, this is the thing. But I mean, if you go to Iceland, you don't have to deal with, they're not in the EU, right? Is Iceland in the EU? Off the top of my head? No. So at least I don't think they are. Someone correct me, but you should be able to have access. They're very concerned about privacy there, so you should be able to like route your VPN there and then go to your favorite news sites and be able to get access and information there. But I want to know, like, where's Congress on this, guys? Like, where are members of Congress calling on these tech oligarchs about this censorship? Marco Rubio, like last year, was asking, or 2 years ago now almost, was asking YouTube, like, why are you censoring conservative content? I just was on Marco Rubio's website. He sent a letter to YouTube Chief Executive Officer at the time, Susan Wojcicki, raising concerns about YouTube's latest censorship of religious and political conservative speech.
But it has to be, they have to be complicit, because who's taking down the website? If RT.com went down, that's not YouTube or Facebook. Who's that?
Right. Who's that? Amazon Web Services via the CIA? I mean, again, we know that the CIA works with Amazon, right? Amazon Web Services provides bandwidth via Amazon Web Services to the CIA.
No, we only care when it's things we don't want. I mean, Marco Rubio was asking about only conservative voices, right? Again, we come back to the point that you have to protect speech you do not like if you are going to pretend or actually be a champion of free market economy, of free market information. Not just conservative voices as a conservative, right? But all voices. We have to be willing to hear all voices. And as a society, we decreasingly can stomach it. We're just, we're too scared of hearing something. And we're going to talk later about this idea of domestic terrorists. We think that like, oh, we can't have this information because it enables domestic terrorists, right? Whatever scary thing we can tell you that we need to shut down information for, we will use it.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like Alex Jones was a sacrificial lamb. I think everybody, I understood that was a bad thing. And once they banned Alex Jones from everything and they saw all these people like, yay, Alex Jones is gone, they're like, hey, we can do this. And then it just expanded from there. And now it's getting completely out of control. So that's why Alex Jones should have been protected by all of us, but because he wasn't, because so many people celebrated, then they even were able to ban the president from Twitter and people celebrate.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I saw so many liberal voices, middle of the road liberal people that came out, that Biden types that were like, "Yes, thank God you got rid of Alex Jones." Well, it's a slippery slope, because then what happens? And this was bound to happen, right? We warned you that this would happen here on this show, right? That this was bound to happen. That now it was going to be speech that you liked that was going to start to be censored. Of opinions and things that you agree with that's going to be censored, and that shouldn't be the case. It should be no censorship. Be free speech purists. That's what we are on this show. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, we have a membership program. For the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism just by going to morninginvest.com/join.
You get access to exclusive videos, plus the ability to join and chat with us live. We really appreciate your subscription, and you are supporting independent journalism.